A poor waitress gives a glass of water to a thirsty Hell's Angel, thinking it's just another small act of kindness. But the next day, something shocking happens. Her tiny roadside diner is surrounded by roaring motorcycles, and the same man she helped steps inside, holding an envelope that changes her entire life. What she doesn't know is that behind his quiet thank you lies a dark secret, a past full of danger, betrayal, and guilt he can't escape. As kindness turns into chaos and faith collides with fear, her small act of mercy pulls her into a world she never imagined, one that could destroy everything she's worked for, or redeem them both. But when the law comes knocking, and the town turns against her, was her simple kindness a miracle, or a mistake that will cost her everything? Drop a comment below, and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the Crossroads grill, its rays reflecting off the chrome-edged tables visible through the dusty windows. Inside, Maggie Hart's cloth moved in slow circles across the worn counter, each swipe accompanied by the quiet worry lines deepening around her eyes. The mortgage statement lay folded in her apron pocket, its weight heavier than the thin paper should allow. "Mom, what's the square root of 144? Eli's voice carried from the kitchen, where he alternated between scrubbing plates and working on his summer math assignments. 12, honey, Maggie called back, managing a smile despite her concerns. The empty seats in the diner echoed her financial troubles, just 2 regulars nursing coffee in a space meant for 50. The ancient ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, doing little to dispel the oppressive heat. Outside, the highway stretched endlessly in both directions, heat waves dancing above the asphalt. The neon sign announcing "Open" buzzed and flickered, another repair bill waiting to happen. Eli emerged from the kitchen, algebra book in one hand, dish towel in the other. At 16, he was already taller than her, though his face still held traces of childhood in its curves. "These word problems are stupid," he muttered, dropping onto a counter stool. "When am I ever going to need to know how fast 2 trains going in opposite directions will meet?" Maggie reached across to smooth his dark hair, earning an eye roll that didn't quite hide his smile. "Maybe you'll design trains someday," she offered, though they both knew their dreams had smaller horizons these days. The distant rumble of a motorcycle grew louder, its growl distinctive enough to draw both their attention. Through the sun-streaked window, they watched a massive black Harley approach, its rider a dark silhouette against the brilliant sky. The bike slowed, then lurched slightly as it pulled into the parking lot. Something about the rider's posture seemed wrong. Maggie stepped closer to the window, squinting against the glare. The motorcycle came to a stop, and for a moment everything was still. Then the rider swayed, attempted to dismount, and crumpled to the ground beside his bike. "Oh my God!" Maggie was moving before she fully processed what she'd seen. Behind her, she heard Eli's warning. "Mom, wait! He's wearing Hell's Angels colors!" She pushed through the door into the wall of heat outside. From the diner's window, she could see Mrs. Peterson, one of the regular customers, frantically dialing on her cell phone, while her husband shook his head in disapproval. The fallen rider was a massive man, his leather vest covered in patches that confirmed Eli's observation. Tattoos crawled up his neck and disappeared into his graying beard. But what Maggie noticed most was his labored breathing and the sheen of sweat on his too pale face. Without hesitation, she knelt beside him, using her apron to shield his face from the brutal sun. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, deep brown eyes filled with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. She recognized that look. She'd seen it in her own mirror often enough, "Water," she said firmly. "Eli, bring water, please." She heard the diner's door open and close, followed by quick footsteps. Eli appeared beside her, holding a large glass of ice water, his expression a mix of concern and wariness. The man's hands trembled as he reached for the glass, but Maggie helped steady it. "Small sips," she instructed, her voice gentle but firm. "You'll make yourself sick if you drink too fast in this heat." He complied, taking careful swallows. Some color gradually returned to his face, and his breathing became more regular. Up close, she could see the years etched in the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. Despite his intimidating appearance, there was something vulnerable in his careful movements, in the way he wouldn't quite meet her gaze. "Thank you," he finally managed, his voice rough as desert gravel. The words seemed to cost him something, as if gratitude was a currency he rarely spent. "I'm Maggie," she said, still holding her apron to provide shade. "This is my son, Eli. Do you need us to call someone?" He shook his head slowly. "No, nobody to call." He shifted, preparing to stand. "Name's Reaper." Eli tensed at the name, but Maggie remained steady, offering her arm for support. After a moment's hesitation, Reaper accepted the help, rising to his feet with a grunt of effort. "You should rest a bit before getting back on that bike," Maggie suggested. "We've got air conditioning inside, and I make a decent cup of coffee." Something flickered across Reaper's face. Surprise, perhaps, or uncertainty. He glanced at the diner, where faces quickly disappeared from the window. "Better not," he said quietly. "Don't want to cause trouble for you." Maggie understood. She could already imagine the gossip that would spread through their small town. But she'd learned long ago that kindness was rarely the wrong choice, even when, maybe especially when, it made others uncomfortable. "At least finish your water," she said, nodding to the glass Eli still held. "Doctor's orders." The faintest ghost of a smile touched Reaper's lips. He took the glass, draining it slowly while leaning against his motorcycle. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across the parking lot. When he handed the empty glass back to Eli, his movements were stronger, more controlled. He swung his leg over the Harley, bringing the engine to life with a low rumble. For a moment, he sat there, hands resting on the handlebars, as if wanting to say something more. But in the end, he simply nodded, first to Maggie, then to Eli, before guiding his motorcycle back onto the highway. They watched until he disappeared into the sunset, the sound of his engine fading into the constant hum of distant traffic. Eli picked up the glass from where they'd set it on the diner's steps, the remaining ice melting in the evening heat. "That was either really brave or really crazy, Mom." Maggie wrapped an arm around her son's shoulders, remembering the look in Reaper's eyes, that bone-deep weariness, but also the surprise at being shown simple kindness. "Sometimes they're the same thing, honey." They turned back to the diner, where Mrs. Peterson was already on her second phone call, no doubt spreading the news of what had transpired. The mortgage statement crinkled in Maggie's pocket, but somehow its weight felt a little lighter. She couldn't explain why, but as she watched the last rays of sunlight glint off the half-empty glass in Eli's hand, she felt a peculiar sense of peace, as if something important had just begun. The morning sun streamed through the dusty windows of the Crossroads Grill, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Maggie moved between tables with practiced ease, coffee pot in hand, while the usual morning crowd huddled in their booths, their voices pitched low but urgent. Mrs. Peterson sat with her quilting circle friends, all four of them leaning in close as she recounted yesterday's events for what must have been the 10th time. "A Hell's Angel, right here in our town. And Maggie Hart, bless her heart, rushing out there like some guardian angel. More like a fool, Martha Jenkins muttered, stirring her coffee with more force than necessary. Those types bring nothing but trouble. Maggie approached their table, keeping her smile steady. More coffee, ladies? They fell silent, exchanging meaningful looks. Finally, Mrs. Peterson reached out and patted Maggie's hand. Dear, we're just concerned. A woman in your position can't be too careful. My position? Maggie's voice remained gentle, though her grip on the coffee pot tightened slightly. A single mother, Martha clarified, as if Maggie needed reminding. With a teenage son to think about. Behind the counter, Eli was stacking clean plates, but Maggie could tell by the set of his shoulders that he was listening to every word. At 16, he'd developed an uncanny ability to appear busy while missing nothing. The bell above the door chimed, and Sheriff Tom Dugan walked in, his badge catching the morning light. He settled onto his usual stool at the counter, removing his hat and running a hand through his graying hair. Morning, Maggie, he said, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. Heard you had some excitement yesterday. If you call giving someone water in 100-degree heat exciting, Maggie replied, setting a mug in front of him and filling it with fresh coffee. Depends on the someone, Dugan said, adding 2 sugars to his coffee. Word is he was wearing Hell's Angels colors. You know, technically, harboring criminals is against the law. His mouth twitched in what might have been a smile, but his eyes remained serious. She wasn't harboring anyone, Eli spoke up from behind the counter, his voice steady but with an edge of defiance. Mom just helped someone who was thirsty. That's what decent people do. Sheriff Dugan raised an eyebrow. That right? He took a long sip of coffee. Well, just be careful, Maggie. Some people don't deserve your kindness. The morning rush gradually thinned out, leaving Maggie time to clean and restock. As she stepped outside to sweep the front steps, something caught her eye, a black leather glove lying in the dust near where Reaper had collapsed yesterday. She picked it up, running her thumb over the worn leather. After a moment's consideration, she placed it on the windowsill inside, where its owner might spot it if he passed by again. The afternoon stretched on, hot and lazy. Eli worked on his summer reading between customers, while Maggie balanced the books, trying not to stare too long at the overdue notices. The sun was just beginning to set when they heard it, the distinctive rumble of multiple motorcycles, growing louder by the second. Maggie's heart jumped into her throat as she looked out the window. At least a dozen motorcycles were pulling into the parking lot, their riders moving with military precision as they parked in a perfect V formation. Their leather vests bore the unmistakable Hell's Angels insignia. Mom? Eli's voice was tight with concern as he moved closer to her. It's okay, she said, though she wasn't entirely sure of that. The diner had emptied out except for an elderly couple who quickly paid their bill and hurried out the back door. The front door creaked open, and Maggie's breath caught. There stood Reaper, but different from yesterday. He'd shaved, and his silver-streaked dark hair was neatly combed. In his hands, he held a bouquet of wild sunflowers, their bright yellow petals a stark contrast to his black leather vest. He stepped forward, his boots silent on the linoleum. The other bikers remained. Outside, their engines off, but their presence felt like a physical force in the small diner. You gave me water, Reaper said, his voice low and gravelly. Now I pay my debt. He placed the flowers on the counter, followed by a thick manila envelope. Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the envelope. Inside was her mortgage bill, the same one that had been keeping her awake at night. But now it bore a red stamp across the front. Paid in full. She stared at it, unable to process what she was seeing. "I don't understand," she whispered. The morning sun hadn't yet burned away the desert chill when cars started filling the Crossroads Grill parking lot. Maggie watched from behind the counter as familiar faces pressed against the windows before the diner even opened. "Mom, look at this," Eli said, peeking through the blinds. "I've never seen the lot this full, not even during tourist season." Maggie smoothed her apron, taking a deep breath. "Well, better get ready for a busy morning." The moment she unlocked the door, people flooded in like a desert storm. The usual morning crowd mixed with faces she hadn't seen in months, maybe years. Everyone wanted coffee, pancakes, and most of all, information. "Is it true?" Mrs. Peterson leaned across the counter, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire diner. "About the Hells Angels paying your mortgage?" "I didn't ask for anything," Maggie explained for what felt like the 100th time, refilling coffee cups with practiced efficiency. He was just grateful for a simple kindness. "Simple kindness doesn't usually come with that many zeros," George Thompson commented from his corner booth. "Maybe you're in with them now, eh, Maggie?" The suggestion made her stomach turn. "I helped someone in need. That's all there is to it." But the whispers continued, spreading through the diner like spilled coffee. Maggie caught fragments as she worked. "Dangerous men. Must be something more. What kind of message does this send?" Around noon, when the crowd thinned slightly, Maggie stepped out back to catch her breath. That's when she saw him. Reaper, examining her back porch with careful eyes. His leather vest was draped over a nearby chair, revealing muscled arms covered in faded tattoos. "Wood's rotting," he said without turning around. "Could come down in the next storm." Maggie approached slowly. "You don't have to." "I know." He finally looked at her, his eyes holding something she couldn't quite read. "But I want to, if you'll let me." She noticed his motorcycle parked near the old storage shed, saddlebags unpacked. "Are you staying?" "For a while." He gestured to the shed. "That offer still good?" Maggie nodded, remembering her impulsive offer last night when he'd mentioned needing a place to sleep. The shed wasn't much, just a simple structure with a concrete floor and solid walls, but it was dry and private. Throughout the afternoon, the sound of hammering mixed with the diner's usual clatter. Customers watched through the windows as Reaper methodically replaced rotting boards, his movements precise and practiced. When he moved on to inspect the kitchen roof, Eli couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. "Were you a carpenter before?" the boy asked, holding the ladder steady. "Mechanic," Reaper replied. "But you learn all kinds of things on the road. Roof's got some weak spots. Won't last another monsoon season." To Maggie's surprise, Eli stayed outside, passing tools up to Reaper and asking questions about motorcycle engines and repair work. Her son's initial wariness seemed to be melting under Reaper's patient explanations and quiet competence. As the day cooled into evening, Maggie brought out sandwiches and cold drinks. They sat on the newly repaired porch steps, the desert stretching endless before them. "My wife," Reaper said suddenly, his voice rough like he was unused to speaking these words. "She used to make sandwiches just like this. Turkey with that yellow mustard." Maggie waited, sensing there was more. "She begged me to leave the gang." He stared into the distance. "Said it would kill me, or worse, kill what was good in me. I always told her next month, next year. Then she got sick. Cancer moved fast. By the time I was ready to leave..." His voice trailed off. "I'm so sorry," Maggie whispered. "Haven't set foot in a church since the funeral," he continued. "Haven't prayed either. Figured God had better things to do than listen to someone like me." Thunder rolled in the distance, a warning of the approaching storm. Eli had already gone inside to finish his summer reading, leaving them alone with the desert wind. "Storm's coming," Reaper noted, standing up. "Better check those new circuit breakers I installed. Old ones were ready to blow." As if on cue, the sky opened up. Rain pounded the metal roof as Reaper worked in the utility room, his tattooed arms now streaked with water from checking the outdoor connections. The lights flickered once, twice, then held steady, his repairs already proving their worth. Inside the diner, Maggie lit a candle, more from habit than necessity now. The small flame danced as she bowed her head, words coming naturally despite the strange circumstances. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm, "if you sent him here, show me what for. Help me understand the purpose in all this." Through the window, she could see Reaper's silhouette against the rain, steady and strong as he worked to protect her home from the storm. The candle flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance with the rhythm of her prayer, while thunder rolled across the desert like a distant answer. The morning after the storm brought clear skies and unexpected changes. Word about the mysterious biker who paid a waitress's mortgage spread through 3 counties, drawing curious visitors to the Crossroads Grill. Cars that normally zoomed past on the highway now turned into the gravel parking lot, their occupants eager to see the place where kindness bloomed in the desert. Maggie barely kept up with the orders. The bell above the door chimed constantly as people filed in, filling every red vinyl booth and chrome-edged stool at the counter. The griddle sizzled non-stop with pancakes and burgers, while the coffee maker gurgled overtime. "Never seen it this busy," Eli remarked, stacking clean plates behind the counter. His math textbook lay forgotten beneath the register, summer homework temporarily abandoned in the rush. "God works in mysterious ways," Maggie replied, wiping sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. She glanced out the window where Reaper worked steadily on the building's exterior, seemingly oblivious to the attention he attracted. By mid-morning, she had enough extra cash to pay off her outstanding electric bill and the overdue repair costs on her ancient Chevrolet. The envelope felt lighter in her hands as she sealed it, a weight lifting from her shoulders. Around noon, Reaper came in through the back door, tools in hand. "Found something in the storage room," he said, gesturing for her to follow. In the corner stood an old Wurlitzer jukebox, its chrome dulled and glass clouded with years of dust. Maggie remembered when it used to play, filling the diner with music that made even tired truckers tap their feet. "Hasn't worked in 5 years," she said. "Repair shop wanted more than I could afford." Reaper ran his hand along the curved top. "Mind if I take a look?" For the next few hours, between serving customers, Maggie watched him work. His large hands moved with surprising gentleness as he cleaned connections and replaced worn wires. Eli brought him tools and asked questions about electrical systems, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the checkerboard floor, a familiar melody suddenly filled the air. Patsy Cline's voice emerged from the jukebox, singing about falling to pieces. The diner fell silent for a moment before erupting in applause. "It's beautiful," Maggie whispered, feeling tears prick at her corners of her eyes. The music seemed to breathe new life into the old building, as if awakening something that had been sleeping too long. Reaper just nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing his face as he wiped his hands on a rag. The next song started playing, Johnny Cash talking about walking the line, and conversations resumed, now accompanied by the soundtrack of simpler times. The good days stretched on. Regular customers mixed with newcomers, sharing stories over coffee and pie. Even Sheriff Dugan seemed to warm up to Reaper's presence, especially after the biker fixed his deputy's motorcycle free of charge. But peace, like desert rain, proved fleeting. It happened during the quiet hour between dinner and closing. The sun had just set, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. The jukebox played softly, Hank Williams longing for the light of a clear blue morning. Only 3 customers remained, an elderly couple sharing a slice of apple pie and a trucker nursing his 4th cup of coffee. The unmarked sports utility vehicles appeared silently, their black paint reflecting the diner's neon sign. 5 of them surrounded the building with practiced precision. Men in dark suits stepped out, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Maggie was refilling sugar dispensers when they entered. The bell chimed discordantly as the door swung wide, admitting 4 agents who scanning the room with cold efficiency. Their leader, a tall man with steel-gray hair, held up a badge. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," he announced, his voice cutting through Hank Williams' twang. "We're looking for Daniel Reeve." Reaper stood slowly from where he'd been fixing a wobbly table. "That's me," he said quietly. "Mr. Reeve, we have some questions about a robbery at the Silver State Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada, 2 years ago this month." The elderly couple quickly paid their bill and hurried out. The trucker remained, watching with undisguised interest over his coffee cup. "There must be some mistake," Maggie stepped forward. "He's been here, helping with repairs. He paid my mortgage." "Ma'am," the agent cut her off, "we have a warrant for Mr. Reeves' arrest and questioning." He produced an official-looking document. $2 million in casino funds disappeared that night. A security guard was seriously injured. Reaper hadn't moved. His face remained calm, but Maggie saw his hands clench slightly at his sides. "You'll want to cuff me," he said to the agents. "That's procedure, right?" "Mom?" Eli's voice came from the kitchen doorway. He stood frozen, dish towel still in his hands. "It's all right, son," Reaper said, his voice gentle. "Everything's going to be fine." He turned to Maggie as an agent approached with handcuffs. "Don't believe everything they say." The words hung in the air between them as the agents led him out. Through the windows, Maggie watched them place him in one of the vehicles. Thunder rolled in the distance, another storm approaching from the mountains. Rain began to fall as the convoy of black vehicles pulled away, their tires crunching on gravel before finding pavement. The sound of engines faded into the desert night, leaving only the soft patter of raindrops and the muted notes of the jukebox. Maggie stood in the doorway, trembling slightly. Water dripped from the newly repaired awning, each drop catching the neon light like tears. Behind her, Eli turned off the jukebox mid-song, and the silence felt heavier than any storm cloud. The rain continued to pour, drumming on the metal roof that Reaper had fixed just days before. Maggie's hand found the doorframe, steadying herself as she watched the red taillights disappear into the darkness, taking with them the man who had brought such unexpected change to their lives. The morning after Reaper's arrest dawned gray and heavy. Maggie unlocked the diner's door at 5:30 in the morning, just like always. But everything felt different. The space seemed bigger, emptier without his steady presence. The fixed jukebox stood silent in the corner, a reminder of better days. She walked through her opening routine mechanically, starting the coffee, checking the coolers, prepping the grill. Her movements felt slow, as if moving through water. The repairs Reaper had done were everywhere she looked. The smooth-running ceiling fan, the freshly painted walls, the sturdy new shelving. Each fix now felt like a statement of faith he'd placed in them. Eli came downstairs later than usual, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept much. He started wiping down tables without being asked, his movements sharp and angry. "Mom?" he finally burst out, dropping the rag. "You can't get mixed up in this, please." His voice cracked slightly. "We were doing okay before he came. We can do okay again." Maggie paused in the middle of counting sugar packets. Honey! No, listen. Eli's fists clenched at his sides. The FBI doesn't just arrest people for no reason. What if everything was just a setup? What if the mortgage money was stolen? We could lose everything. Eli Hart. Maggie's voice was firm but gentle. Do you really believe that? The fight seemed to drain out of him. No, he admitted quietly. But I'm scared, Mom. The way people are looking at us now, like we're criminals too. Maggie crossed the room and pulled her son into a hug. At 16, he was already taller than her, but in that moment he felt like her little boy again. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone, she murmured into his hair. But we're not alone. We have each other, and we have faith. The morning crawled by. Regular customers came in, but conversations died when Maggie approached their tables. Some avoided eye contact entirely. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. By 10 o'clock, Maggie couldn't stand it anymore. She hung up her apron and told Eli she was going to see Sheriff Dugan. Her son's worried look followed her out the door. The sheriff's office was a small brick building 2 blocks from the diner. Inside, a blast of cold air conditioning hit her face. The dispatcher, Mrs. Peterson, barely glanced up from her crossword puzzle. Sheriff's in his office, she said flatly. Maggie knocked on the door marked Thomas Dugan, Sheriff, and entered at his gruff, "Come in." Sheriff Dugan was doing paperwork, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He didn't look surprised to see her. "Mrs. Hart, been expecting you?" "Tom." Maggie sat down without being invited. "I need to know what's happening with Reaper, with Daniel." The sheriff sighed and took off his glasses. "You know I can't discuss an ongoing federal investigation." "Can't or won't." Maggie leaned forward. "You've known me 15 years, Tom. You know I wouldn't defend someone I thought was dangerous." "What I know," Dugan said carefully, "is that you've got a big heart that sometimes overrules your common sense. My advice? Stay out of biker business. These people, they operate by different rules." "These people?" Maggie's voice rose slightly. "The man fixed my roof. He helped Mrs. Johnson start her car when it died in the parking lot. He taught Billy Peterson how to change his bike chain. Are those the actions of a hardened criminal?" "Good deeds don't erase past sins, Maggie." The sheriff's voice was tired. "Go home. Take care of your boy. Let the law handle this." Maggie stood, her hands trembling slightly. "The law isn't always right, Tom. You know that better than most." She left before he could respond, the door clicking shut behind her. Sunday morning came, bright and hot. Maggie put on her best dress, the blue one she saved for special occasions, and drove herself and Eli to the First Baptist Church like she did every week. As they walked up the steps, she held her head high, though her stomach churned at the whispers that followed them. The usual greetings were muted. Several people who normally sat near them found seats elsewhere. During the hymns, Maggie could feel stares boring into her back. Then came prayer requests. Mrs. Anderson stood up to ask for prayers for her sister's gallbladder surgery. Mr. Peterson requested prayers for his son's college applications. And then Martha Wilson, who'd been coming to the church longer than anyone, stood up. "I think we need to pray for wisdom," she announced, her voice carrying clearly. "Wisdom to recognize wolves in sheep's clothing and to protect our community from those who would bring danger to our doors." The pointed silence that followed was deafening. Something snapped inside Maggie. She rose slowly to her feet, her knees shaking but her voice steady. "I'd like to request prayers too," she said clearly. "Prayers for a man who showed more Christian kindness in 1 week than this town has shown in a year." Gasps and mutters rippled through the congregation. Pastor Stevens shifted uncomfortably at the pulpit. But Maggie wasn't finished. He fixed things that were broken, not just at the diner but in people's lives. He helped without being asked. He showed respect to everyone he met, and when trouble came, he faced it with dignity. Her voice trembled but didn't break. If that's the action of a wolf, then maybe we need to reconsider what makes a sheep. She sat down, her heart pounding. Eli squeezed her hand under the pew. The rest of the service passed in a blur. As people filed out afterward, the whispers continued, but something had shifted. A few people met her eyes with something like shame. Others nodded slightly as they passed. Maggie was collecting her purse when someone touched her arm. She turned to find herself face to face with Clara Jennings, a retired lawyer who'd moved to town 5 years ago. Clara's kind face was creased with concern. "Mrs. Hart," she said quietly, "could we talk for a moment?" They moved to a quiet corner while Eli waited by the door. Clara's gray hair was neatly styled, her clothes simple but elegant. "I was a public defender for 30 years, Clara said without preamble. "I've seen enough cases to know when something doesn't add up. If you'd like, I'd be willing to look into Mr. Reeves' situation. Pro bono, of course." Maggie stared at her, hardly daring to hope. "You'd do that?" Clara smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. Standing up in church like that took courage, and courage deserves support. She pulled out a business card. "Come by my house tomorrow. Bring any paperwork you have, anything he might have told you about his past." Maggie clutched the card like a lifeline. "Thank you," she whispered. I've been praying for a sign." "Sometimes," Clara said gently, "God answers prayers through people willing to help. We just have to be brave enough to accept it." Walking to the car with Eli, Maggie felt something she hadn't since the night of the arrest. Hope. It was small, like a mustard seed, but it was there. Maybe kindness wasn't so small after all. Maybe it was the biggest force there was, working in ways no one could see until the results appeared, like flowers pushing through concrete. The Sunday sun beat down on the parking lot, but Maggie barely felt the heat. She had work to do, faith to keep, and now, finally, help in doing both. The morning sun cast long shadows across Clara Jennings's kitchen table, now covered with stacks of legal papers and newspaper clippings. Maggie sat beside her, both women hunched over their third cup of coffee, studying every detail they could find about the Nevada robbery. 2 years ago, Clara murmured, tapping a yellowed article. A casino's safe emptied overnight, $3 million gone. Security cameras mysteriously stopped working. She looked up at Maggie with shrewd eyes. "But something's not adding up." Maggie nodded, remembering Reaper's quiet ways, his gentle hands fixing broken things. "He told me once that he tried to leave the gang. That night means something. I can feel it." Clara pulled out a map marked with red circles. "There's an old repair shop 30 miles north, Tank's Garage. The owner used to run with the Angels." She hesitated. "It could be dangerous, Maggie." "I have to know the truth," Maggie said firmly. She thought of Reaper's truck, still parked behind the diner where he'd left it. "And I think I know how to get there without drawing attention." An hour later, Maggie climbed into Reaper's restored pickup truck. The key had been hanging in her kitchen, left behind like so many other pieces of his interrupted life. The engine rumbled to life, strong and steady from his careful work. The desert highway stretched endless before her, heat waves dancing on the asphalt. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tight, remembering how Reaper's calloused fingers had worked so carefully on the engine, the way he'd explained each repair to Eli with patience and respect. Tank's Garage appeared like a mirage, A weathered building with faded signs and rusted parts scattered across the dirt lot. A few motorcycles leaned against the wall, their chrome dulled by sun and neglect. As Maggie stepped out of the truck, a tall man emerged from the shadows of the garage. His gray beard was streaked with grease, and his eyes were hard until they fell on Reaper's truck. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Maybe even guilt. "Tank?" Maggie asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. He nodded slowly. "Ain't seen that truck in a while." His voice was gravelly, like stones rolling down a hill. "You're the diner woman." "I need to know what happened that night in Nevada," Maggie said, taking a step forward. "The real story." Tank turned away, busying himself with a wrench. "Don't know nothing about that." "Please," Maggie pressed. "Reaper, Daniel, he helped me when nobody else would. He's a good man. I know something happened that night. Something more than what the police say." Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky remained clear. Tank's hands stilled on his workbench. Without turning, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Vex. It was Vex." Maggie quietly slipped her phone from her pocket, pressing record. "Tell me," she said softly. Tank's shoulders slumped. "That night, Reaper was supposed to be our lookout at the casino. But he wasn't there. He'd come to me earlier, said he was done, wanted out clean." He turned, his eyes haunted. Vex knew. He planned it that way. Used Reaper's absence to pull the job, then made sure evidence pointed back to him. Perfect setup to eliminate competition and move up in rank. "You've known this all along?" Maggie's voice shook with emotion. "Fear's a powerful thing, ma'am. Vex, he ain't the forgiving type." Tank wiped his hands on a rag, leaving dark streaks. "But I ain't getting any younger, and some things weigh heavier than fear." The recording continued as Tank detailed everything. Dates, names, the real sequence of events. When he finished, Maggie's phone showed 15 minutes of testimony that could change everything. The drive back felt different. Hope mixed with urgency as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. At home, she found Eli sitting on the porch steps, holding a piece of paper that looked worn from repeated folding. "Mom," he said, his voice thick. "I found this behind the jukebox. It's from Reaper." Maggie sat beside her son, taking the letter with trembling hands. Reaper's handwriting was careful, each word clearly chosen with thought. "Dear Maggie and Eli, some debts can't be paid with money. Your kindness gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. You showed me that grace still exists in this world, even for someone like me. I tried to leave that life behind 2 years ago, but the past has a way of finding you. Whatever happens, please know that your diner became more than a crossroads for me. It became a lighthouse in the darkness. Thank you for treating me like a man worth saving." Tears fell freely down Maggie's cheeks as thunder cracked overhead. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall, and lightning split the sky. In its brief, brilliant flash, the diner's sign flickered to life. Crossroads, the letters catching the light like a beacon in the gathering storm. Eli wrapped an arm around his mother's shoulders. "We're going to help him, right?" Maggie clutched the letter and thought of the recording on her phone. Truth-given voice at last. "Yes," she said firmly. "We are." The rain fell harder now, drumming on the roof like applause from heaven. Inside her pocket, Maggie's phone held Tank's confession, each word a step toward justice. The storm raged on, but beneath its fury, hope burned steady, like faith tested by fire, emerging stronger for the trial. Clara Jennings sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of newspapers and legal documents. Her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose as she scrolled through her laptop, searching through social media posts from 2 years ago. The clock on her wall ticked past midnight, but she couldn't stop, not when she was this close. Her arthritic fingers moved carefully over the keyboard, typing in another search term. Suddenly, her breath caught. There, on a community outreach page, was a photo that made her heart skip. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, leaning closer to the screen. The image showed a group of veterans at a shelter fundraiser in Henderson, Nevada. And there, in the background, unmistakable even without his leather jacket, stood Daniel Reaper Reeve. He was helping serve food, wearing an apron over a plain white t-shirt. The timestamp read 8:45 p.m., October 12th, the exact night of the casino robbery. Clara's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. Despite the late hour, she knew Maggie would want to know immediately. "Hello?" Maggie's voice was groggy with sleep. "Maggie, dear, it's Clara. I found something. Something big." 20 minutes later, Maggie sat beside Clara, both women staring at the computer screen. Maggie's eyes filled with tears as she studied the photo, noting how different Reaper looked. Younger, somehow, less burdened. "The robbery happened at 9:30 that night," Clara explained, shuffling through her notes. "Henderson is over 2 hours from the casino. There's no way he could have been in both places." Maggie pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. "We need to print this. Now!" Clara's ancient printer wheezed to life, producing a clear copy of the image. Maggie held it like it was made of gold. "The jail's visiting hours start at 9 a.m., Clara said, squeezing Maggie's shoulder. "I'll make some calls. See about getting an emergency meeting arranged." The night seemed endless. Maggie couldn't sleep, instead sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the photo. She thought about Reaper's quiet strength, his gentle way with Eli, how he'd fixed things around the diner without being asked. The man in the photo, serving others, helping veterans, that was the real Daniel Reeve. Morning came with a soft, pink sunrise. Maggie dressed carefully in her best blouse, tucking the photo into her purse. The drive to the county jail took 45 minutes, each mile marked by prayers whispered under her breath. The jail was a gray, concrete building that seemed to absorb all color around it. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Maggie went through security. Her heart pounded as a guard led her to the visiting area, a row of booths with thick glass between them. She waited, clutching her purse, watching the door on the other side. When it opened, her throat tightened. Reaper walked in, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look pale and tired. His tattoos stood out starkly against his skin, but his eyes, they were what broke her heart. They looked empty, like he'd given up hope. He sat heavily in the chair, picking up the phone receiver without meeting her gaze. Maggie took a deep breath and lifted her own receiver. "Daniel," she said softly. His head jerked up at the use of his real name. For a moment, he just stared at her, as if trying to memorize her face. "You shouldn't be here," he finally said, his voice rough. "You've done enough already." Maggie shook her head, reaching into her purse with trembling fingers. "Actually, I haven't done nearly enough, but that's about to change." She pressed the photo against the glass. Reaper leaned forward, squinting, then suddenly went very still. His hands began to shake as he recognized himself in the image. "Where?" His voice cracked. "Where did you find this?" "Clara found it. Look at the timestamp, Daniel. You were there, at the veterans' shelter, the entire night of the robbery." Reaper's eyes filled with tears, the first time Maggie had seen such raw emotion from him. His fingers touched the glass where the photo was, tracing the outline of his past self. "I'd forgotten about that night," he whispered, After everything that happened, I thought God forgot about me too." Maggie pressed her hand against the glass, matching his. He never forgot. He was just waiting for the right time to reveal the truth. For the first time since she'd met him, a real smile cracked across Reaper's face. It transformed him, erasing years of pain and guilt. A tear rolled down his cheek as he laughed softly. "That night," he said, "I was trying to start over. Had been clean 6 months. The shelter director asked me to help serve dinner." He shook his head. "Never thought doing the right thing would end up saving me." "God works in mysterious ways," Maggie said, smiling, through her own tears. They talked for the full 30 minutes aloud, making plans. Clara would file the evidence first thing tomorrow morning. The photo, combined with Tank's recorded confession, would be impossible to ignore. When the guard called time, Reaper stood slowly. "Maggie," he said, "thank you for believing in me when nobody else did." "You believed in yourself first," she replied. "The night you decided to leave the gang. The night you served at that shelter. You just needed someone to remind you of that man." Driving home, Maggie felt lighter than she had in years. The afternoon sun painted the desert in shades of orange and gold, like the world itself was celebrating. She turned on the radio, and to her delight, the station was playing the same song that had first played on the jukebox after Reaper fixed it, an old country ballad about redemption and second chances. She hummed along, tapping the steering wheel in time with the music. Tomorrow morning she would meet Clara at the courthouse to submit their evidence. But for now, she simply drove, watching the sun paint the sky in colors of hope. The diner came into view, its windows catching the last rays of sunlight. Eli stood on the porch, waiting for her with an expectant look. Maggie touched the photo in her purse and smiled. Sometimes, she thought, miracles don't come with lightning and thunder. Sometimes they come quietly, hidden in old photographs and simple acts of kindness, waiting to be discovered by those who refuse to stop believing. The evening settled softly over the desert, painting the sky in deep purples and blues. Inside the Crossroads Grill, Maggie wiped down the last table, humming along to the jukebox that Reaper had fixed. The melody filled the warm space with hope, a song about second chances that seemed perfect for tomorrow's big day. She had closed early tonight, wanting everything ready for the morning when she and Clara would submit their evidence. The photo and Tank's recorded confession were safely tucked away, ready to clear Reaper's name. Even Eli had caught her hopeful mood, giving her a quick hug before heading upstairs to bed. "Night, Mom," he'd said, actually smiling for the first time in weeks. "Wake me before you leave tomorrow?" "Promise," she'd replied, watching him take the stairs 2 at a time. Now, alone in the diner's gentle glow, Maggie found herself pausing at different spots. The counter where Reaper had left the sunflowers, the old jukebox he'd brought back to life, the porch he'd repaired. Each place held a memory of kindness that had changed everything. The coffee pot burbled softly as she made a final cup, savoring the quiet moment. Through the windows, stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Everything felt peaceful, like the calm before a blessing. Then headlights flooded the parking lot. At first, Maggie thought it might be Sheriff Dugan doing his nightly rounds. But these lights were different. 3 pairs of them, harsh and predatory. Her heart started hammering as motorcycle engines growled in the darkness. The door burst open with such force it rattled the windows. 3 men stormed in, their boots heavy on the worn linoleum. Maggie's blood turned to ice as she recognized the leader, Vex, his face twisted in a cruel smile. "Evening, ma'am," he drawled, making the polite words sound like a threat. "Heard you've been poking around where you shouldn't. 2 other bikers flanked him, their faces hard as stone. They spread out, blocking the exits. Maggie's mind raced to Eli sleeping upstairs, to the evidence that could save Reaper hidden in her purse behind the counter. "We're closed," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You'll have to come back tomorrow." Vex's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Oh, we're not here for coffee. Word is you found something interesting. A photo that could cause some trouble? Be a shame if anything happened to it, or to this nice place you got here." Maggie's hand trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. With deliberate calm, she reached for her purse, watching their eager expressions. But instead of pulling out the photo, she let the bag slip behind the counter. In one fluid motion, she knelt down, pretending to pick it up, and quickly slid the photo under a loose floorboard she'd noticed weeks ago. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, standing up with empty hands. Vex's face darkened. "Wrong answer." He nodded to one of his men, who pulled out a gas can from under his jacket. "Last chance. Where's the photo?" The smell of gasoline filled the air as the biker began splashing it around the diner. Maggie's throat tightened with fear, but she thought of Reaper sitting in his cell, waiting for justice. She thought of all the times she'd chosen faith over fear. "Get out of my diner," she said firmly. "Your choice." Vex pulled out a lighter, flicking it open. The flame danced in his cold eyes. "Better run." The first splash of fire caught the curtains, spreading faster than Maggie could have imagined. She bolted for the stairs, screaming for Eli as smoke began to fill the air. "Eli, wake up! Fire!" She could hear him stumbling around upstairs as she reached his door. The smoke was thicker now, making her eyes water and her lungs burn. Eli appeared in his doorway, confused and scared. "Mom? What's happening?" "We have to get out, now!" They stumbled down the stairs together, holding hands like when he was small. The heat was intense, flames already consuming the walls where so many family photos had hung. The jukebox crackled and died, its last song cut short. They made it outside just as windows began exploding from the heat. Maggie pulled Eli across the parking lot, both of them coughing and gasping. In the distance, sirens wailed. Someone must have called the fire department. But Maggie knew it was too late. They could only watch as the flames devoured everything. The porch Reaper had fixed collapsed in a shower of sparks. The roof caved in with a terrible groan. Years of memories, of struggle and survival, reduced to ash and embers. People began arriving. Neighbors, customers, faces Maggie knew but couldn't focus on. They stood in a silent circle, watching the fire trucks arrive too late. Water hissed against hot metal and stone, but the Crossroads grill was already gone. Eli's hand tightened in hers. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Maggie pulled him close, feeling his shoulders shake with silent sobs. The heat of the fire dried her tears before they could fall. In the distance, Vex's motorcycles roared away into the night, leaving destruction in their wake. Miles away, in his cold cell, Reaper was just settling onto his bunk when a guard passed by with a newspaper. The headline caught his eye. "Local diner burns in late-night fire." His heart stopped as he grabbed the bars. "Wait, please! That diner, was anyone hurt?" The guard paused, skimming the article. "Says it was empty. Total loss, though. Owner and her kid made it out." Reaper sagged against the bars, relief warring with grief. The diner had been Maggie's whole life. She'd risked everything to help him. And now... He knew what Vex was capable of. This was just the beginning. As long as Reaper lived, Maggie and Eli would never be safe. There was only one way to protect them now. "Guard," he called out. "I need to speak to the prosecutor. I want to confess." "Confess? To what?" Reaper closed his eyes, seeing Maggie's kind face, remembering her faith in him. Sometimes protection meant sacrifice. "Everything," he said quietly. "The robbery, all of it. I'll sign whatever they want." The guard gave him an odd look but nodded. "I'll let them know in the morning." Reaper returned to his bunk, listening to the guard's footsteps fade away. He picked up the worn Bible Maggie had sent him, running his fingers over its pages. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. "But at least you'll be safe now." Outside his window, the desert night stretched endless and dark, hiding both destruction and sacrifice beneath its star-scattered sky. The church basement was cold and damp, but Maggie was grateful for its shelter. 4 days had passed since the fire, and the smell of smoke still clung to their borrowed clothes like a stubborn memory. On the narrow cot beside her, Eli slept fitfully, his face twitching with dreams she hoped weren't nightmares. The morning light filtered weakly through the high basement windows when heavy footsteps creaked on the stairs. Sheriff Dugan appeared, his usual confident stride replaced by something more hesitant. He cleared his throat softly, not wanting to wake Eli. "Mrs. Hart?" he said, his voice low and gruff. "Got a minute?" Maggie nodded, carefully rising from her cot. They moved to the corner where a small table stood with 2 metal folding chairs. The sheriff sat, his weathered hands folding a manila envelope. "I should have listened earlier," he said, meeting her eyes briefly before looking down. "About Reaper, about everything." He pushed the envelope across the table. "Food vouchers, good at Jensen's Market. It's not much, but—" "Thank you," Maggie said simply, touching the envelope but not opening it. "Town's still— well, people are scared, after the fire, but they're wrong about you." He stood awkwardly, adjusting his belt. "Church is serving breakfast upstairs if you're interested. They could use help in the kitchen, too." Maggie managed a small smile. "I'll be there." The church kitchen became her sanctuary over the next few days. She threw herself into the work, chopping vegetables, stirring huge pots of soup, serving plates to whoever came through the doors. There was something healing in the simple act of feeding others, just as she had done at the diner. The faces that passed through reminded her of Reaper, a veteran with haunted eyes, a single mother counting change, a teenager trying to look tough while clearly hungry. She served them all with the same care she'd shown him that first scorching day. At night, after Eli fell asleep, Maggie would sit at the kitchen table with paper borrowed from the church office. She wrote letters to Reaper by the dim light, pouring out her heart. "The jukebox you fixed might be gone," she wrote one night, "but the music you brought back to our lives still plays. God hasn't forgotten you, Daniel. Neither have we." She sealed each letter, knowing she had no address to send them to, but needing to write them anyway. They piled up in her borrowed dresser drawer, waiting. One morning, while stirring a pot of oatmeal for the breakfast crowd, Maggie heard quick footsteps behind her. She turned to find Clara Jennings, usually so composed, looking flushed and distressed. "Maggie," Clara said, catching her breath. "We need to talk." The ladle slipped from Maggie's hand, clattering against the pot. "What's happened?" "He confessed." Clara's voice was tight with disbelief. "To everything. The robbery, other charges. He's pleading guilty to all of it." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Maggie grabbed the counter for support, her voice barely a whisper. "No, he did it for us, because of the fire." Clara nodded grimly. "I think so too. He must believe it's the only way to keep you safe from Vex and his crew." Maggie straightened slowly, something hardening in her chest where grief had lived. "Then we'll prove he's innocent, even if I have to start from nothing but ashes." "Maggie, it won't be easy. A confession makes everything more complicated." Nothing worth doing is ever easy, Maggie said, wiping her hands on her apron. But I won't let him sacrifice himself for us, not after everything. She looked around the church kitchen, at the people eating breakfast, at Eli doing homework in the corner. They'd lost their home, but not their hearts, not their faith, and certainly not their determination to fight for what was right. "Where do we start?" she asked Clara, her voice stronger now. The morning light streamed through the church windows, catching the dust motes in its beam. Somewhere in a cell, Reaper sat with his false confession, thinking he'd protected them. But Maggie knew sometimes protection meant fighting back, even when all seemed lost. August melted into September, and life settled into new rhythms. Maggie and Eli found a small trailer on the outskirts of town, close enough to walk to church but far enough to avoid the whispers. It wasn't much, just 2 narrow bedrooms and a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. But it was shelter. Every morning, Maggie woke before sunrise to bake pies in the church kitchen. Apple, cherry, peach, whatever fruit she could find on sale. Her hands remembered the motions even when her heart felt heavy. She sold them at the farmer's market, tucking each dollar into an old coffee can labeled Grace's Diner in neat black letters. "Why Grace's?" Eli asked one evening, counting the day's earnings at their tiny fold-out table. "Because that's what brought us this far," Maggie answered, rolling out another crust. "Pure grace." Clara visited regularly, bringing legal papers and hope in equal measure. One Tuesday afternoon, she arrived with news that made Maggie's hands tremble. "There's a former Hell's Angel in hospice care," Clara explained, spreading out documents on their cramped counter. 3 hours south. He was Vex's partner, and he's asking to clear his conscience before... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Maggie didn't hesitate. "I'll go tomorrow." The drive through the desert felt endless. Hot wind whipped through her open windows, making the truck's steering wheel dance beneath her hands. The same truck Reaper had fixed, she thought, touching the dashboard gently. The hospice was quiet, all soft footsteps and whispered conversations. The biker lay skeletal against white sheets, tubes snaking from his arms. His eyes, though, were clear and urgent. "You're the diner lady," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "The one Reaper tried to protect." Maggie nodded, setting up her phone to record. "I am." "Vex planned it all," he continued, each word seeming to cost him. "The Nevada job, framing Reaper, all of it. Reaper wasn't even there. Vex wanted him gone because Reaper was going straight." He coughed, a rattling sound. "I helped set him up, been eating at me ever since." Maggie recorded every detail, every name, every date. When the man finished, tears tracked down his hollow cheeks. "Hope it helps," he whispered. "Make it right." Driving home, Maggie watched storm clouds gather in her rearview mirror. The same dark purple-gray as the night Reaper had collapsed outside her diner. Thunder rolled across the desert, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not just hope, but certainty. The truth was finally coming to light. Autumn painted the eye, desert in softer hues as justice finally arrived, carried on papers signed by a judge in a quiet courtroom. No reporters crowded the courthouse steps, no cameras flashed, just Clara's steady presence as she watched years of wrong being made right. The morning of Reaper's release dawned clear and cool. He stood at the prison gates, holding only what he'd been given, a small bag of belongings and a well-worn Bible Clara had sent months ago. His weathered fingers traced the leather cover before opening it to find a slip of paper with Maggie's name written in her careful hand. The borrowed motorcycle, a friend of Clara's had arranged it, waited in the parking lot. Reaper swung his leg over the seat, feeling strange in clean clothes instead of prison orange. The cross hanging from his neck caught the morning light as he started the engine. Meanwhile, in town, excitement buzzed around the new building on Main Street. Maggie and Eli stood on ladders, carefully mounting the sign they'd worked on for weeks. The words, "Grace's Diner," shone in fresh paint, with smaller letters below promising free water for all. Their new beginning, built from ashes and faith. A small crowd had gathered, church members, regular customers from the old diner. Even Sheriff Dugan stood at the back, his hat in his hands. They watched as mother and son worked together, Eli holding the sign steady while Maggie hammered. "Ready?" Maggie called down to the waiting people. At their eager nods, she and Eli pulled away the canvas covering. Cheers erupted, echoing off the fresh white walls of the diner. Then another sound cut through the celebration, the distinctive rumble of a motorcycle. The crowd turned as one, watching the rider approach. Reaper pulled up slowly, his bike gleaming in the morning sun. He looked different. Clean-shaven, wearing pressed clothes, the silver cross visible at his throat. The hammer slipped from Maggie's fingers, hitting the ground with a thud that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered words that carried in the desert air. "You came home." Reaper stood beside his bike, his own eyes glistening as he took in the sign, the crowd, and most of all, the woman who had given him water when he was thirsty, hope when he was lost, and faith when he had none. Weeks drifted into months, and Grace's Diner bloomed like a desert flower after rain. The renovated building hummed with the warmth of conversation and the gentle clink of coffee cups against saucers. Sunlight streamed through spotless windows, catching the chrome trim of the rebuilt jukebox that now played soft melodies throughout the day. A testament to Reaper's skilled hands that had pieced it back together from the wreckage. In the adjoining garage, the sound of tools and patient instruction mixed with the diner's atmosphere. Reaper stood beside Eli, guiding the teenager's hands as they worked on a traveler's motorcycle. "See how the timing chain needs to be just right?" Reaper explained, his voice gentle but firm. "Too loose and it'll slip, too tight and it'll bind." Eli nodded, his face serious with concentration. The boy who once viewed Reaper with suspicion now absorbed every word, every lesson about engines and second chances. Their shared work had built a bridge between them, stronger than steel and more precious than gold. Inside the diner, Maggie moved between tables with the grace of someone truly at home. Her smile reached her eyes now, no longer weighted by worry about overdue bills or uncertain futures. She set a steaming slice of apple pie before a dusty traveler, then reached for the water pitcher. "Water's free here, always," she said, filling his glass to the brim. The traveler's eyes widened at the unexpected kindness, and Maggie saw in his face the same surprise she'd once seen in Reaper's. The walls of Grace's Diner told their story to anyone who cared to look. There, in a simple wooden frame, hung the charred remains of the old Crossroads Grill sign, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained. Beside it, written in careful calligraphy, were words that had become the heart of their mission. "Whoever gives even a cup of cold water in my name will not lose their reward." The verse caught the evening light, casting gentle shadows across the clean linoleum floor. As the sun began its descent behind the desert mountains, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple, Reaper took his usual seat by the window. His hands, clean now but still bearing the honest marks of a day's work, wrapped around his coffee cup. The same seat where he'd first collapsed from heat and exhaustion now held a man transformed by grace and second chances. Maggie approached with the coffee pot, noting how the sunset gilded his features. Gone was the haunted look in his eyes, replaced by a peace that seemed to deepen each day. She filled his glass with water, then his cup with coffee, remembering that first desperate afternoon when a simple act of kindness had changed everything. Reaper watched the last rays of sun paint the desert gold. "All this," he said softly, gesturing to the thriving diner, the garage where Eli worked, the community they'd built, "from a single glass of water." Maggie set down the coffee pot, understanding filling her heart. "That's how grace works," she replied, her voice warm with certainty. "It starts small, but it grows." The bell above the door chimed its welcome as another traveler stepped in from the cooling evening air. Golden light spilled across the floor, drawing patterns of hope and forgiveness in its wake. The new arrival paused, taking in the warmth, the music, the smell of coffee and pie, and the tangible sense of welcome that filled every corner of Grace's diner. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.